Welcome to a meeting of the Hunterdon Central Regional High School Board of Education. Please be advised that this and all meetings of the board are open to the public and media, consistent with the Open Public Meetings Act, and that advance notice required therein has been provided. Meeting notice was also posted in the boardroom at the Upper School campus, sent to the Courier News, Star Ledger, Express Times, and Hunterdon County Democrat, and sent to the clerks of Delaware Township, East Amwell Township, Flemington Borough, Raritan Township, and Reddington Township. The public will have an opportunity to be heard as shown on the agenda. May I please have a roll call?
Mrs. Bloodfield? Here. Dr. Charney?
Here.
Mr. Davidson? Here. Mr. Fowler?
Here.
Mrs. Kellogg? Here. Mr. Nickel?
Here.
Mrs. O'Donnell? Mr. Richard?
Here.
And Mrs. Hughes.
Can we please stand for the flag salute? I pledge allegiance
to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. I want to note on the agenda there are several correspondences that we've received, and as shown, and these have been distributed to all board members. And next we have the superintendent's report.
Thank you, Mr. Richard, and thank you, everybody, tonight. Good evening. It was a beautiful day outside today. It was gorgeous on campus. It was good to get around outside a little bit, and there's a lot of hope as we head into this warmer weather of the spring and this last leg of the school year. So we have some celebrations to do tonight, and I'm really pleased for all of you to be here for that. And some good work to share and more in my report tonight. So I'm going to start with, we have 3 of our students tonight that we're honoring as Eagle Scouts. 2 actually who graduated last year who are being honored tonight for getting their awards. So I'm going to come down really quickly to the podium and recognize them from there. Jack Herman, who's not with us tonight, right? Where is Jack?
Basic training.
Jack is at basic training. So Jack graduated last year and did a really important project here on Central's campus and in high schools around the whole county, correct? Yes. With Stop the Bleed kits, and you can see these in our hallways. In the event of a need, we have kits now in the hallways for the treatment of bleeding, thanks to Jack's efforts. So we have for him, not as good as all the certificates he'll get in his career now, but there we go. So thank you and congratulations. We have Curtis Wheatley here tonight, right? Come on up, Curtis. Curtis, class of 21 graduate as well, and is now at Rutgers.
Yes.
Congratulations, I'm a Rutgers
Thank
graduate.
you.
And Curtis told me he's got a midterm tomorrow, so we got to move quickly on. Curtis, congratulations to you. What was your project?
So my project at a local cemetery, I put up a flagpole and as a memorial to all the veterans that are buried there. So it has a yard arm on it, which is, if you can just think of a T in the ground. And then on both sides are the branch flags of the U.S. military. So there's Army, Marine Corps, Navy, and Air Force. And then obviously at the top is the American flag. And also around it is bushes. And then there's a little plaque that says how it's dedicated to all the veterans buried there. And I chose it because it's one of the oldest cemeteries in the county, actually. And Daniel Bray, who's a Colonial War soldier, he's buried there, along with a ton of other veterans, and my grandfather, who was a Marine. So I decided to do that project. I always planned on going into the military, which I have done. And so now I'm doing, National Guard, and I'm going to Rutgers. And so that's why I chose that project. It's very meaningful to me, and yeah.
Yep.
Thank you.
And lastly, we have a current student, a senior, and that's William Quitniak here. Come on up, William.
Thank you very much.
There you go. Tell the board a bit about your project.
So my project was at JP Case Middle School, and it was building a sustainable bench and indoor garden system for the gardening club at JP Case, as well as the cooking classes. And I had to do this during the COVID-19 pandemic, during the inflation of wood costs, so it definitely made the project a bit more interesting. But we did get through it, and we were able to cause no outbreaks, so that was great too. The project is now in place at JP Case outside of the new snack shack, as well as in the courtyard, and it is a raised garden setup that was coordinated with the master gardener there, who also happens to be the cooking teacher, and using the square foot gardening method, as well as various sustainable water techniques that allow for the rainwater to be reprocessed in more viable ways.
So causing no outbreaks was like enough of a project by itself, so that was good. Parents of our three young men, can you stand up just so that we can honor you? And we have some scout leaders with us. You want to share any thoughts? Come on up.
I'll share a little bit. I don't want to take up too much time. My name's Ward Ingersoll. I'm the Scoutmaster for Troop 65 in Ringo's. And all these boys that are represented here have had leadership positions in our troop and have mentored younger scouts coming up. And it's been a real, I guess, proud moment for me as a Scoutmaster to see them develop as they go through and take their careers into college for Jack and Curtis. One thing I would like to say is all three boys attended Philmont Scout Ranch in New Mexico, which is a high adventure base, and learned a lot of leadership skills when they were there for 10 days in the backcountry backpacking. So it was a great achievement for them in their scouting career.
I just want to thank and honor our scouts for their wonderful work, but also the adults, parents, and scout leaders who worked with them. Just fantastic stuff. Thank you so much. Some other celebration to do tonight. I'm pleased also tonight to have the cast and crew and staff who worked together on Les Mis. And could you all stand up for 1 second, please? Let's do one more standing ovation for them. Let's give another standing ovation. Thank you all. Yeah, so bear with me a little bit as I gush a little bit more about you all. The board and indeed the whole community wanted to make sure to offer you one more standing ovation on this show, which was most important to our school this year. One of the most important productions we've done in a long time. And I was saying outside, all of the arts and music, very strong here at Central. Lots of talent, lots of talented staff, lots of talented kids and families and guidance that you all get on your way to really excelling in the arts. And every performance we do is amazing. It contributes enormously to our community. There was something about Les Mis this year that signaled something to us about, as I kind of talked earlier, about a hopefulness coming into the last leg of the school year. It was a statement at a difficult time for our community, for our school. It's a tough time in this world, and this was the right show for this year, and we were just blessed to have the talent and the interest and all of the chops of our staff to pull it off. Above all else, it was just a stunning production that you all did. So I really deeply appreciate the work that you all put into that, and grateful for the feeling that you all gave us through that run. So one more standing ovation there for you tonight. So. And I also want to thank Mr. Bart Chateau, who's in the room, right? Where's Mr. Chateau? There he is, for bringing his congratulations tonight as you got to meet and chat with him outside as we all enjoyed some cake together. I'm going to say it again because I enjoyed saying it. A star of screen and stage, Mr. Chateau, who also, did some work on Les Mis in tour and on Broadway. But I don't want to put him on the spot, but I think he offered to sing something for us tonight, right? Right? So come on up. Come on up. We'll do it from the public comment. You can't act a lot, but you can sing right into the And if I understand this correctly, it's not from Les Mis, but this is a selection from Hamilton. Is that correct? Yes. Oh, that's incredible. All right. What are you going to sing for us?
Well, I've been working on I just sent the audition today for King George.
Oh.
And I wanted to try it out on you guys. And I'll let you know if I get the role or not. But this is very impromptu, and thank you for allowing me to perform for you. And I heard the young man play Valjean's rendition of Bring Him Home. And once I heard it, I was like, I'm not singing Bring Him Home. So I thought I would do something a little different. Plus, I sing with Bring Him Home all the time, and my voice is shot. So we want, I was thinking, we just want the impression of his gorgeous voice in our minds for the rest of centuries to come. So you're amazing, by the way. So it's a little King George for you. You say the price that I love is not the price that you're willing to pay. You cry when you tears you hurl in the sea. You see me go by. Why so sad? Remember we made an arrangement when you went away. Now you're making me mad. Remember, despite our estrangement, I'm your man. You'll be back soon, you'll see. You'll remember you belong to me. You'll be back, time will tell. You'll remember that I served you well. Oceans rise, empires fall. We have seen each other through it all. And when push comes to shove, I will send a fully armed battalion to remind you of my love. Da 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 You say our love is draining and you can't go home. You'll be the one complaining when I am gone. So now don't change the subject, 'cause you're my favorite subject, my sweet submissive subject, my loyal, royal subject, forever and ever and ever and ever and ever. You'll be back like before. I will fight the fight and win the war. For your love, for your praise, I will love you till my dying days. When you're gone, I'll go mad. So don't throw away these things we had. 'Cause when push comes to shove, I will kill your friends and family to remind you of my love. Da 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 da.
Thank you so much for that. Thank you, Mr. Shadow, for bringing your not just your good wishes, but just such incredible talent for us, for our students and our families tonight. Thank you so much for that. Goodness. Mrs. Lucas is going to do a presentation about social studies next. Let's take a couple of minutes to drift down into the seats so that we can see the screen. We'll bring the screen down and we'll take a couple of minutes to get her set up so that she can do her presentation. And this is a good breaking point for folks. Thank you so much.
I don't really think I need it. There's not that many people, but okay. Well, that was probably one of the hardest transitions I'm ever going to have to make, honestly. So I'm going to turn around a little bit so I can see everybody. I don't want to have my back to you, though. Oh, I can have my back to Mr. Brandt. That's okay. He knows me. But actually, it was the perfect segue, since it was about social studies. It's about history, right? American Revolution. Okay. So, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Rebecca Lucas. I'm the supervisor of social studies and family and consumer science. But tonight, I'm just going to share our social studies department and some of the good work that they've been doing. So I wanted to just share with you a little bit about what our offerings are. We have a lot of coursework that students can choose from. We have 23 courses over and above our required classes that students need to take. So there they are. We have great AP courses. We have 3 dual enrollment courses, and then we have our electives. There's our required course progression. So, and this is a typical course progression. We're pretty flexible with the idea that if a student comes in and they need to take a course because they missed a year, if they were from somewhere else, from another district, we have students that may take a course if they're freshmen. They may take a US 2 course because they've already taken their other courses. So US 1 is typically in the freshman year. Sophomore year, we now have an AP US History course that's 10 credits. This is our 3rd year. Our first year was 1920 when the pandemic first hit. So that was a great experiment. But the students meet every day for AP US History, and they cover that just in their sophomore year. So when they're recommended for that, or they choose to take it, They take whatever they want to their freshman year. They may take an elective in the social studies, they may take an elective somewhere else, and then they come in their sophomore year and they take a 10-credit course with us. The junior level, which is the last level of our required courses, you can either take a global studies class or you can take AP World. And those are the 3 courses that are required for graduation in New Jersey that we have. In our social studies department a few years ago, we started de-leveling. We do not have an honors level course. We don't have requirements to get into courses. If a student wants to try an AP course, they're perfectly capable of doing that. They really don't specifically need a teacher recommendation. So if they want to try and challenge themselves, we welcome them in our department. I wanted to share with you a little bit about my department, our department. And this doesn't even come close to explaining what type of department and what type of staff we have. But I just thought it was a good statistic for you to see. 63% of our staff, I have a staff of 27. They have their master's degree. I have 11% of my staff that are in the middle of their doctoral work, and 14.8% of our staff have their PhD or their doctorate. They range from, I think you saw Mr. Butler, Dr. Butler, not too long ago. I have something in here that I'm sharing with you from him. He just recently got his doctorate in Irish Studies. We have folks that have advanced degrees in Holocaust studies, in educational administration. It runs the gamut. You can ask Mr. Brandt over there. The social studies department is very involved in student life. We have teachers who are advising all types of clubs, and every time you turn around, there's a social studies teacher somewhere. So they're here at a lot of board member meetings to support our students. And they're a super involved and super dedicated department, and I'm humbled to be able to work with them. The work that they've done has been incredible. So I want to share a little bit about our teams and our PLC structure. So this is one of 4 teams. I couldn't fit them all in one slide without making it too small for everyone to see. So I'm not sure if you realize, but in social studies, you have to have a special certification to teach psychology. You have to have a minor. You can't just have a standard social studies cert. So finding psychology teachers is like finding a needle in a haystack when you need them, and we have 3. We have a very robust psychology program. It's one of the most highly enrolled elective series in the school. So our psychology team is Mr. Pomerico, Mr. Bellotti, and Ms. Olbrich. And here are the rest of our PLC teams. So like I said, I have a large department. I have a global studies team, a US2 team, and a US1 team. Now, also within this PLC structure, because of the amount of classes we have, teachers will double up on professional learning community or teams that they sit on. These are the groups that meet on a regular basis. Teachers tend to be members of multiple PLC teams, and occasionally this can be very overwhelming for staff. We meet every Tuesday. But what this does is the idea that staff members are on multiple PLCs is it's the germination of a lot of ideas in our department. So when you have 12 or 15 staff members who are super involved and super dedicated to their craft, you get a lot of really good ideas. It's like our proving grounds or our sandbox. And what that does is it helps us share ideas with our major PLCs. It tweaks assessments. It does a lot of the work that you don't see when you go into a classroom, a lot of those behind-the-scenes work. The bulk of that work supports classroom instruction, and it takes place here. But then also in this area is where we get a lot of innovation with learning strategies, activities, and assessment practices. And when we moved into the pandemic and moved into remote teaching, this is where a lot of our ideas for how we were going to change instruction to be fully remote or hybrid came from these groups. So I'm going to share with you a little bit of data. So this is AP data from 2021. We obviously don't have our data for this year. But what this actually is this bar graph compares the Hunterdon Central percentage of students who scored a 3 or higher to New Jersey students who scored a 3 or higher. In College Board, a 3 is passing. So I thought that this would be good data for you to take a look at. Our students meet or exceed the New Jersey percentage in all but 2 of these courses. I'll talk about those in a minute. What I would like you to take a specific look at is if you look at micro and macro there. Macro, the orange is us and blue is New Jersey. So we exceed in both of those, and what's, I think, very special about this is that AP Economics is a 5-credit course, and our teacher teaches both AP Micro and AP Macro within that period. So they're actually studying for both of those exams and taking both of those exams and meeting our expectations and in most cases beating them. So AP US and AP Euro are the courses where we're not quite meeting those expectations. Like I said previously, AP US, this is a new course for us. We have not had a full year of regular instruction yet. This is our first year of that. So it's been a very bumpy road trying to change instruction to fit our students. So we're hoping that with this year, we're in the middle of AP study groups now, that will be a little bit better. AP Euro is one of the hardest AP tests to take. It's got a very low pass rate, which means a lot of times what College Board will do is they will rank your courses based on pass rate, and AP Euro has a very in-depth type of historical context that you need to know, and the exam is a little bit more difficult. So that's one where we have a little bit of work to do. Linkit. So we started experimenting with Linkit, which is our data management system, and this was a difficult task for us because social studies right now we're not. So when I went to high school, and I might be dating myself a little bit, it was a lot of rote memorization, right? It was a lot of names, dates, events, and that's not how our department functions. So we're really skill-based. So what we use is we use our skills to drive the content. So students don't really memorize much in the department these days. So to create stimulus-based types of questions for an assessment was not an easy task for the department. So it took us a little bit of time. We experimented last year, and we came up with some pretty good assessments for US1 and US2 that we're working on, our students are taking now and that we're tweaking. So the reason why we're doing Linkit is for those four data points right there. Number 1 and number 2 is really what we're focusing on now. So when you look at some of these Linkit assessments, and I'm going to share some samples with you, we're looking for our standards. That's the NJSLS for social studies. More importantly, we're looking at historical thinking skills, how well students can decode or source a text, if they understand advanced nuances in what the speaker or what the artist is conveying. New Jersey state mandates, which I will also go over because we do have quite a bit of quite a lot of those, and companion standards, which would be English and math and science. And we also analyze the progression of student growth. So I'm going to share a few. I'm going to share a US1 with you, so you can take a good look at this. Here we go. All right. So this is what a student would take a look at in Linkit. And in social studies, we have 4 distinct units. So it's almost like marking peers. We have Unit 1, Unit 2, Unit 3, Unit 4. This is our Unit 3 Linkit assessment. And this is the reform era for US1. So obviously, women's suffrage is involved in that time period. So what the student would do is they would read a document about women's suffrage, and then they would answer some stimulus-based response questions. So they need to take a look at what the thesis would be of that document. So what is the main idea? They would have to take a look at some, what was the amendment that was being spoken about? So the questions aren't really, you can't memorize these. You have to understand how to read the text and how to apply your historical thinking skills to understand what's being said here. And let's see, I have it up here. Oh, okay. And here is a US2 Linkit, and this is a reform move. This is a Unit 3 as well. And you'll see that once you get to the sophomore level, the documents get a little bit more complex, and also students are looking at not just one document, but 2. So this is the Civil Rights Movement. This would be Unit 3, and this is actually Letter from a Birmingham Jail, which is one of the seminal documents of this time period. So, and then you also have a photo of a protest during this time period. So the students have to actually take a look at these, decode, figure out what the thesis is, for document A, document B, and then synthesize both of these documents to answer the following questions. On document A, document B, and then both. And then the actual significance of those. So what we're looking for here is we're looking at students' ability to apply historical thinking skills to these documents. And we have specific processes that students use to do this. All right. These are some of our learning gaps, which obviously we have some pretty significant learning gaps, especially post-COVID or post-pandemic. So through our Linkit assessments, we took a look at those stimulus-based questions, and up to this date, historical context and purpose are the areas where students seem to be having a little bit of trouble. Now, those are some abstract types of skills that I'll talk about in a little bit. And then we also have our PLC unit assessments. So there are 4 major summative assessments that we use to track student growth. And some of the strategies and some of the skills that they're assessed on are inquiry, research, writing, and presentation or discussion. And what we're seeing there is that students are struggling with some abstract thought, with making inferences, and with content-specific reading and writing. Now, during remote and hybrid learning, we found out that a lot of the middle school students were not reading much or not writing much, right? Because when you were online, there wasn't a lot of that going on. Everyone was trying to keep their heads above water. And the actual content reading for social studies is very difficult to do when a student is home and you're on Google Classroom and you're on remote with them. So this is where our students are struggling, our freshman students specifically. So some of the things that we are working on to accelerate our kids and give them the support where they need are, we're looking at some of the skills that deal with some of the weaknesses, and we're breaking them up into smaller pieces, and we are implementing them into instruction on a more regular basis. I can show you an example of that in a minute. Okay. So our PLC teams have really taken a look at some of the weaknesses, and they've discussed some of these gaps, particularly in US 1 and US 2. So we're currently right now at the share, reflect, and evaluate stages of our cycle. We've broken down some of the larger skills. We're giving regular practice with the students, and some of the strategies, especially some of the work that we're doing with content and with participant identity, has helped students make more connections with purpose and abstract thinking. Okay, and here's where I'll talk a little bit about some of those skills. So here's some of our department practices and skills. So some of the practices that our teachers regularly use with our students are listed here in our little circles: discussion and simulation. Some of you have had students that have gone through our department, have heard of like the Enlightenment Salon, where students will actually have a scored discussion in the classroom where they take on the persona of someone, they have to do research, and they actually have conversation with other folks that are other reformers of that time period. Historical writing, inquiry, identity work, choice boards, and HIPAA. Choice boards came out of the pandemic, and it's become a practice that we found has been very helpful for students when it comes to student choice. So for example, if you're looking at the civil rights movement in US 2, students may have a specific document that they would look at, and they would have the choice to do certain activities. They would get to pick whichever one they wanted, and they would all satisfy the requirement that they needed. HIPAA is the cornerstone of our coursework, and I'm going to share that with you now, and then I'll get to the skills. So this is my HIPAA cheat sheet when I go into classrooms and take a look at what's going on. So this is to help examine primary and secondary sources, and this is what we do in the classroom. We are not textbook-based. We use primary and secondary sources more to get our information from and to glean what history is about. So students will take a look at a document and they'll apply what we call HIPAA. So HIPAA is a historical thinking strategy, historical context, the date of the document, what was going on when the author wrote it, what was going on in total not just what was going on at that particular place, but what was going on in the world or in the country around them when that document was written or that political cartoon was drawn. Some of the higher level thinking skills in historical context is what larger events shape the writing of this document. We all know that when we write something or create something, there's something going on that's making us do that. So we encourage our students to figure those things out. Intended audience, this is one of those abstract thoughts, those abstract thinking skills that some of the students have been struggling with. What type of document was it? Was it intended for the public, or was it intended for someone's spouse? Was it intended for a church group? Who is speaking to whom? How does the audience shape or inform the content of the document? Me talking about the department here, right, in front of board members in public, it would be very different if I was talking to my own department members who know a lot of this already. My presentation would be very different. So that's intended audience. Purpose. Why did the author create this? How does the author's purpose shape or inform the content of the document? So a lot of this now gets up into that abstract type of thought process. What point is the author attempting to convey? And then at the end, author's perspective. And this is where you come into bias, right? Because everyone who writes something has bias. That's part of human nature. So identify the author and what's the significance of the author's point of view. What's going on with that author that made them create that, write that? How does the author's background, their race, their gender, their social class, how does that impact their writing? And what tone do you anticipate the author to use? And what broad historical themes influence the author in creating the document? So this is our HIPAA practice. And this is what students do as freshmen, as sophomores, and as juniors, and in a lot of our electives. This is a simple way for students to understand how to digest difficult text. And this is a skill that they can take with them, because when they are reading something, when they're adults and they need to understand the point of view or when this was written or why it was written, it gives students a good base of understanding what they're actually reading. Inquiry, this is Dr. Butler's. So this is the inquiry project that he did with Northern Ireland. So this is a very standard inquiry learning project that some of our English teachers developed. He gives them credit at the bottom because he's a good social studies teacher and always cites his sources. So this is what an inquiry project would look like in any area in our department. So they take a look at a standard. If you take a look here, this is the standard that they would, this is a New Jersey State learning standard. So students would actually close read that, digest it, and come up with some questions that they may want to research. And then they go through an entire research process. And I sat in on Dr. Butler's presentation or his students' discussion a week and a half ago, and you cannot believe the level at which students discuss these events because they've done their research. They have a frame and a structure to work with, but what they use and what they research within that structure is totally of their own choice. So when a student has a choice within that structure, they are very passionate about what they're talking about, and it was amazing. I just sat and listened. They knew more. I mean, they know more about this topic than I think I could ever at this point. So this is just a traditional process for inquiry. They do a lot of reflection, and then at the end, they talk about, so what, why is this important? And that's where some of those conversations come into place. Identity work. I think you've probably seen some of this. So what we're doing right now with our students is we're finding that students are struggling to understand people in more than a one-dimensional way when they're reading a document or they are listening to a speech. So if you ask someone who Dr. Martin Luther King is, they're going to know him, but they're not going to know some of the issues that made him who he was. So this activity that I shared with you is actually from the progressive era. And what students were doing was they were looking at progressives. They were picking 4 areas that they wanted to look at in their life, maybe location, gender, citizenship, socioeconomic status, and they were applying those to those reformers, and then they were trying to figure out what their point of view might be. Now, not only were they doing that, but they were taking 3 progressive presidents, Taft, Roosevelt, and Wilson, and applying those same identity thoughts to those presidents. For example, what do we know about Taft? Does anyone know?
He's the biggest president ever.
Thank you. Okay? He was obese. His coffin was huge. So when you ask students, that's what they know. But what they don't know is when you do a little research, you realize that President Taft gained almost 100 pounds when he went into office because he was depressed and he ate. And so you put a human quality on someone, and it gives them a little bit more of an idea how to have empathy. So that's what we're working on with this type of document. So this is what they would look at. They would choose 4 aspects of an identity, and they would look at the reformer and say, okay, how would this affect my reformer? I'm just going to click on this because this is big. This is everything that we do, and I'm not going to go through a lot of this because it's crazy stuff. Critical thinking and historical thinking skills are listed here. Our department is in the process of creating almost a document that would attach with our curriculum that just says this is what we do. Here's the work that we do in civics. Here's the work that we do in inquiry. Here's our historical thinking skills. Here's our critical thinking skills. So when someone wants to go in and take a look at language for a rubric or work on a project, they have the language that we use as a department. So it's kind of like a who we are. All right, our mandates. There are a lot of them. So some of these are mandates, and some of these are actually woven into our curriculum. One of those would be climate change. Asian American Pacific Islander mandate is brand new. That one is still in the works. We have to have it in our curriculum, but very much like the Holocaust mandate, they are creating a commission. They will actually create curriculum and documents for our teachers to use, like they did with the Holocaust Commission. So that is the newest mandate there. But I'll start with the Holocaust mandate and just go through these very briefly for you. So obviously the Holocaust mandate, you know that we need to teach Holocaust and genocides, but also in addition to that, the Holocaust mandate also requires that we teach students that it's their personal responsibility to fight racism and hatred wherever they see it. Amistad is to celebrate the contributions of people of color in an appropriate place in the curriculum. That's everywhere in U.S. history because Black history is U.S. history. We talk about the building and development of America in the areas of industry, military, social institutions, art, culture, and every other aspect of life in America. LGBTQIA, and I hate when I don't like the disability. I like to say differently abled because disability just sounds negative. But anyway, LGBTQ and disability. So that's a mandate that we actually put into our curriculum last year, and that is political, economic, and social contributions of people with disabilities and lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender people. Climate change, not really a mandate, but our updated standards have a very clear intention when it comes to climate change. Asian American Pacific Islander mandate. Did you know that there were Filipinos here as early as the 1600s in Louisiana? I never learned that in social studies. So there's a lot of history that we're starting to bring into the curriculum. Diversity, equity, and inclusion. We have to highlight, and we plan on, and we do every day, highlight and promote diversity, economic diversity, equity, inclusion, tolerance, and belonging in connection with gender and sexual orientation, race, ethnicity, disabilities, and religious tolerance. We examine unconscious bias. That's part of our HIPAA practice. We encourage a safe and welcoming and inclusive environment for all students, regardless of race, ethnicity, sexual and gender identities, mental, physical disabilities, and religious beliefs. So we have taken these mandates and we have wholeheartedly embraced them in our department, and they are everywhere in our curriculum. So here's an example of that. So we know that when we study the civil rights leaders or suffragettes, there are particular people that always come to the forefront. When you look at civil rights leaders, you hear about Rosa Parks, you hear about Martin Luther King, you hear about Malcolm X, all right, you hear about John Lewis. So after learning about all of the major leaders of this time period, our teachers have now broadened that. So instead of removing, we're adding. So for civil rights leaders, what we've done is, oh, let me go back, sorry. One of my teachers put this together for me. So here's the descriptions of the projects. So for the Civil Rights Project, which is the one I'm going to highlight very quickly, is what we did here is we tasked students with looking for civil rights leaders that are not as well known. Why are they not as well known? Was there something about them that wasn't appropriate for them to be the poster child of that time period? Were they a single parent? Were they gay? Were they not the right color for the time period? So I'll give you a quick example of that. Claudette Colvin, she's one of my favorites. Claudette Colvin actually refused to give up her seat on the bus before Rosa Parks. She was not a really good role model for the media because she was a single mom. So instead of this woman being the person that is written in history books, it's Rosa Parks because she was older. Claudette Colvin was a young single mom, and the media and the movement didn't feel that she would have been a good role model. So she was kind of forgotten. So we're teaching our students to kind of look beyond what they see in a history book. Okay, and this is the end of my presentation. So, and this is another addition, so we're adding. So we know Rosie the Riveter, right? But did you know that there were 600,000 Black Rosie the Riveters? And that wasn't mentioned in history books that often, if never when I was at that age. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to ensure that all of our students see themselves in the curriculum. So when we talk about Rosie the Riveter, we talk about Caucasian Rosie the Riveter and any other Rosie the Riveter that might be out there. So students understand that it wasn't just this person that was decided to take that picture and to be on that propaganda poster. And I ended with this because I actually have a photo of some of our staff members as Rosie the Riveter. So, and that was taken a couple years ago. But anyway, thank you for listening to me. I hope I wasn't too long. Does anyone have any questions? I know I didn't sing and dance, but Rob.
I'm very pleased to see that the evolution of the teaching of history has paralleled the area that I'm familiar with, science, i.e. that moving away from content as the endpoint to process that creates the need to know as opposed to, like you said at the beginning, memorizing stuff.
Yeah.
So yeah, it makes history come alive. Makes me look back and learn all this stuff.
Sometimes I'd like to sit and audit some of my teachers' classes because they're so engaging. But I mean, sometimes there are no right or wrong answers in history.
Right.
So, and students need to understand that's okay. And that what you're learning is a continuum. So, thank you. Any other questions?
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
So some of my fellow board members may guess what I'm going to question you about, but it's Lincoln. So,
Yes.
Are teachers using the bank of questions at Lincoln?
Not for social studies.
Okay.
Because we're not a tested subject in New Jersey, the questions that Lincoln uses, there's some Regents, some New York Regents questions
That's what I was thinking.
that are pretty good. And we're going to be exploring that some more. I wanted them to get used to creating their own questions first because I wanted them to understand how it worked and to have an investment in it before we just pulled some Regents questions. But that is definitely on our list.
Understood. So what kind of growth trajectory are we seeing? And I guess we just gave a benchmark B, or are we on a benchmark C now?
Well, we're just giving our we're just finishing up our third benchmark. So what they're doing and I highlighted US1, they're looking at HIPAA skills in particular. So right now our data is kind of all over the board when it comes to what we're seeing with our growth trajectory. And we're not sure whether that has to do with the topic, like the historical topic that they're reading about, whether it's their actual reading comprehension. So we need to tweak some of those assessments to see actually what that is. Because when you look at the document, like it could be a document on suffragettes, it could be a document on, one of them is Lincoln, is the Civil War. So we're not sure whether it has to do with the student's particular interest in that. But what we are seeing across the board is a strength in the continuity and change part of HIPAA, which is the understanding when things change and why sometimes they stay the same. So
I'm assuming you can tag the questions either with, for example,
yes,
standards,
yes,
or I would say with HIPAA, you'd want to tag the question type, synthesis, application.
right, they are tagged.
Understanding.
Yeah.
So are we seeing anything that stands out in their growth? Is it inference, which is a difficult?
Inference is where we seem to need some work, because that is a difficult skill to have, and freshmen, we don't expect freshmen to have a very deep inferencing capability at that level. So that's something that we are working on, but we do have our questions tagged. They're tagged with the standard, the companion standard, with the skill, and there's another tag. It might be standard, skill, reading companion, and there's another one, and I can't remember what it is.
Well, the question
Yeah.
taxonomy is.
Yeah, and a depth of knowledge.
Okay. So I'm interested because you showed some examples of examining a primary document.
Yes.
And eliciting from that document the meaning, whether it's maybe what the amendment says, or I don't know, I'm thinking out loud, the historical context of that narrative, when it was written, and why it might have that flavor in that time and place.
Right.
So, again, those are difficult things to measure, but do we have any, again, encouraging movement from students in those skill bases?
So in total, so far, especially, let's see, I think it was US 1, Unit 3. We've seen growth in their overall scores from Unit 1 to Unit 3. Historical context, I think, went from about a 69 to an 80, which is pretty good. But they're small assessments, so I don't want to say that there's a whole lot of. I don't want to over talk about the growth, overemphasize that. So this is our first foray into Linkit, and
so how are you using that data for instruction?
we're using that for instruction in teachers understanding or knowing where to now break down some of these skills into smaller pieces and putting them into a regular instructional day. So for example, thesis statements. So you may have a do now that is finish the thesis statement to give students more regular practice, because we know that regular practice in small pieces will help students with their learning.
So you spiral
Yes.
back to those,
Yes,
I guess, weaknesses for them,
Yes.
for lack of a better term.
absolutely.
Well, that's
Yeah.
precisely how it should be used. Wait.
So that's what we're doing now, and we're still really feeling out how best to use some of that, because it's our first walkthrough with this. So there are there's some pieces of the assessment that the teachers would like to change after they're looking, maybe add a few questions, and we're going to be adding more Linkit assessments for next year.
Great,
So.
thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions?
Not after that. No.
No worries.
Thank you, Mrs. Lucas.
All righty.
All right, let's head back up to the table, and I'll round up my report. Thank you.
You can shut it off now, right? Or is it public comment?
So one of the questions, comments, and from Mr. Richard in particular about just the evolution of these subject areas, one of the things that we have to answer to quite a bit is this notion that we just teach stuff. You know, that we just teach English, we just teach math, we just teach history, and that's our job. Now I was a social studies teacher, so I think often about this, but I see it across all of our departments and with new science standards in all of our departments, this realization of what public school in America really has been about. And from the very beginning, you go back to our founding as a country, and it was about preparing kids to be active citizens. You know, that's beyond just teaching stuff. You go to the turn of the 18th, 19th century, and you find folks like John Dewey talking about the need to teach students to solve tomorrow's problems. That's even now yet beyond, you know, to solve problems that nobody even knows about yet. So that's beyond just teaching stuff. And certainly we see that calling today in the world that we live in today. And I'll finish with, as celebratory as we've been tonight, one of the things that we are continuing to struggle with as we head into the end of this year, we do find ourselves continuing to react to rising concerns about social media and how that's impacting students' behavior and the elements there of that sort of dovetail with the kind of instruction that Mrs. Lucas is talking about. It's not just something that we sort of step aside and lecture kids about. It's something that's got to be woven into all the instruction that we do. And their engagement in their schoolwork after a really tough couple of years has been something that we're struggling with too. This is a time of year when we start to send out letters to students and parents when we're concerned about their performance in their classes. And, you know, so we have concerns for some of our students this year as we continue to close some of those gaps and work on some of those skills that they have. We ask all of our students and their families to kind of look at where everybody is right now and see, all right, what does the end of the year need to look like? And that's something we're asking of everyone right now in our community, not just our students, but all the folks who support them as well. And a key concern, as I mentioned there, is the role of social media right now and cyber harassment in many of the HIB incidents that we've talked about and many of the issues that we've talked about across this year. When we didn't think it could get any sharper, it's gotten sharper for us this year, the impact of those things. Now, I recognize that technology has been really a lifeline for our students and for our families over the past couple of years through a lot of isolation that we've all been through. But we also recognize that there is now a need for us to kind of reset and recenter on what it means to be together in person. And so Mr. Brandt and I and Mrs. Cangelosi-Haid and all kinds of folks in our administration have been talking about what do we need to do right now with our students and our families to help equip them against all of these concerns about not just cyberbullying, not just cyber harassment, not just making good choices online, but just how to be together and enjoy each other's company, you know, how to put the phones down. So you'll see us doing some communication this week to our families about let's put the phones down, let's put the screens down. Let's be together and enjoy being together while we have that opportunity right now. You'll see us practicing that a little bit at the end of the week. We're going to start talking about, all right, you know, the rule here has always been during instructional time, phones are away unless the teacher is allowing you to take them out for some educational purpose. So when we're out in the hallway during instructional time, can we put the phones away? You see a lot of our students and a lot of folks walking around with their phones in their hands, even during instructional time if they go out to the restroom or something like that. So you'll be seeing us practicing that a little bit at the end of this week. And the goal is to come back from spring break with some reset expectations around some of that stuff. So as we come back from spring break, thinking about, all right, we have some rules about this stuff that we've got to get back to. Got to get back to rules about how we interact with one another, how we be present with and for one another, and what does that mean then for sort of putting the device aside. And that's part of the education that we talk about, and again, that we integrate into all of our classes, not just stuff, not just English, science, social studies, math content, but really getting back to the roots of what public school has been about from our founding, which is we're building the future. And when I talk about our profession being optimistic, that's what I mean. But it does lead us to make some tough choices in the classroom for what we need to talk about, some tough conversations. So we'll be practicing some more mindful approaches later this week around social media and device use, and again with the expectations of lifting with the thought of lifting those expectations as we return back from break. So we do anticipate everyone's cooperation in this, and I myself also have work to do to reset on my phone usage as part of my own launch into the better weather of the spring. And with that, I appreciate everyone's patience tonight. We had some awesome things tonight, though, in our report. And any questions for me, sir? Yeah. Yes. Yep. Absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. That's always the commitment and the promise to you. There is a lot there, and it's quite a tough job for Jessica's folks and Carol's as well to summarize that all for you in the time that we have, especially when there's singing to be done, right? You know, so. But I appreciate everything tonight. Thank you. Just a reminder, folks, as you're talking tonight, make sure you turn on your mic so everybody can hear you. And with that, there's some movement for the board to make tonight on recommendations for affirming some HIB decisions that were presented at the last meeting. You can see our HIB and suspension report updated on the agenda as well. That's updated every meeting for you. And with that, Mr. Richard, with thanks for everyone's attention, I conclude my report.
Thank you, Dr. Moore. I just wanted to point out to the board members that in our board docs, there is a link to the social studies presentation. All you got to do is click on it. Yep. Okay, so thank you for all that information. We have a couple of action items regarding the HIB reports. Can I have a motion to approve? Or is it 30? 38, 39, and 41. 38, 39, and 41.
So moved.
Second.
I have a second, and I have a vote needed. Can I have a vote?
Mrs. Blatfield?
Yes.
Dr. Charney?
Yes.
Mr. Davidson?
Yes.
Mr. Fowler?
Yes.
Mrs. Kellogg? Mr. Nichol?
Yes.
Mr. Richard?
Yes.
Oh, yes, motion carries.
Thank you. Next is the first residence forum. This is for items on the agenda. These are actionable agenda items. There are two such forums tonight. The second one will be at the end of the board meeting, and that's for any topics. Members of the public who wish to talk, please come to the lectern and sign in and list your name and municipality for the record. And the residence forum will be limited to 5 minutes per person, and no one can speak again until all have been heard. So are there any members of the audience who would like to address the board on agenda items at this time? Seeing none, we can proceed with the committee presentations, and my committee's first.
Are you presenting?
Yeah.
All right.
I might as well. I've got all this stuff right here. All right, so we met last week, and there are a couple of items that are for information. We're not voting on tonight, but are here for you to consider for 2 weeks from now. So first off, we have tuition and transportation, and this is for a special ed student to be sent to East Mountain School. We also have policies for first reading. These policies are included in your board docs, and I'd like for you to please look at them when you have a chance. Most of these policies are policies that we had to update. So, for example, policy 2415.05 addresses the issue of a school board district administering a survey, analysis, evaluation, examination, testing, or treatment funded in whole or in part by a program of the U.S. Department of Education. Then we have policy 2431.4, which has been rewritten to address the revisions from the state of New Jersey, and NJSA 18A 40 to 41.4, which expanded the scope of the law to include intramural sports and interscholastic sports and cheerleading programs. And this is for the purposes of reporting and following up on injuries, head injuries primarily. Policy 8486 has been updated to align with NJAC 6A 16-6.3E and the Uniform State Memorandum of Agreement between education and law enforcement officials responding to hate acts and bias-related acts. Gender identity or expression and national origin has been added to the protected class of individuals pursuant to this law. Bias intimidation. Additionally, school property has been revised to say school grounds. The reporting provisions have been expanded to indicate when a report to local law enforcement by school officials shall be prompt as compared to the circumstances when a report to local law enforcement by school officials shall be immediate. Policy 5541 is a new policy on anti-hazing. It's designated the Timothy J. Piazza Law after one of our alumni. It was passed and approved on August 24, 2021 and goes into effect on March 1 of this year. The new law requires public and non-public high schools and middle schools to adopt an anti-hazing policy. The law created the following statute sections, a whole bunch of numbers, I'm not going to read those, and the appropriate penalties for a violation of the district's anti-hazing policy, requires the district's anti-hazing policy to be applied to conduct on or off school grounds, and requires notification of the district's anti-hazing policy to the school community. We have a new club, and this is the Noteworthy Club. Let's see. Now I've got a summary over here somewhere. Okay, Mr. Brandt presented information about the new club, a select choral group for tenors and basses. This group has unofficially existed for approximately 10 years and has performed throughout the school and at a choral concert. That's a very clever name, too, Noteworthy. We also have an overnight field trip to consider for the indoor color guard going to Wildwood, New Jersey. And costs will be covered through the fundraising and student funding for this competition. Furthermore, we did discuss potential supervisory position focused on equity and wellness. Dr. Moore presented what he thinks this should look like moving forward, and is developing a job description we'll be sharing with the board soon. Dr. Webb provided an update about the alternate programming expansion. She reported seeing an increase in students needing a smaller, more therapeutic setting with the general education settings. She said there is also a need to possibly offer this type of programming for higher academic course level special education students as well. The scheduling has accounted for an increase in alternate program sections and special services, has budgeted to increase the supports for students, including a psychologist / BCBA. BCBA stands for Board Certified Behavior Consultant, and an additional special ed teacher. Also, Dr. Moore discussed the new requirement for a student representative on the Board of Education, and he discussed different models and possibility of having a rotation of students through projects with the Board of Ed for independent study types of projects. Ms. Cangelosi-Hay provided information about Hunterdon Central being a partner with the College of New Jersey and New Jersey Department of Education. This is a grant proposal expanding computer science professional learning among Central New Jersey school districts. Some examples of benefits in the grant proposal are a year-long computer science professional development for K-12 teachers for courses that address the New Jersey computer science standards. Topic-specific workshops such as Java to help prepare teachers to teach computer science. Workshops focusing on physical computing for the middle and high school, along with lending library of classroom kits, and script training to assist in developing a computer science strategic plan for the district, as well as travel reimbursement for teachers attending in-person workshops. Sounds like a very exciting potential partnership with the College of New Jersey, one of my favorite places. And that's it from the Student Life Committee. With that, can we move to the Operations and Transportation Committee for the report, please?
Yes, Operations and Transportation met on Tuesday, April 5th. We have several items that we discussed, a bunch of them actually, several of which we're going to move this evening. We have some unused allowances going back into capital reserve from the Bell, PA, and camera projects that we did last summer. We have some purchases for Chromebooks as well as Alienware Aurora computing devices, both of which have a not-to-exceed number associated with them. We have some outstanding checks that we're looking to cancel and take off the books. We also have surplus property, and we're going to be entering into an agreement with the Hunterdon County Educational Services Commission to help sell those vehicles that we have. Some items on here that we're going to be looking to move in 2 weeks. The budget adoption, which is finally figured out. We got that work going well. We have a Somerset County ESC agreement. We're going to be awarding the storage building bid at that time. We have two parental transportation agreements, both of which actually end up saving us money. And then we are bidding the 2022-23 transportation routes. And with that, I would like to move items G1 through G6.
Second.
Okay, I have a motion and I have a second. Any discussion?
Sure. A couple of quick points. First, I want to, it's not for motion tonight, it's more about the budget adoption down the road, but I just want to thank Heather and congratulate Heather for the work that she did in securing a resolution with the state that brought those cuts, eliminated them, basically, right? We got everything back, and so thank you for that excellent work that kind of sidestepped what could have been a really difficult cut from last year's tax levy and our increase into next year. So thank you so much for that. And I also want to point out, too, the computer purchase here, number 3, serves a couple of different purposes, not just for our curriculum department, but also supports our esports kids who have been doing really amazing work over the past couple of years and winning championships over the past couple of years in that burgeoning sport. So I guess it's well burgeoned by now, but they're doing excellent work. So that's powerful desktop computers for them as well as for our curricular program.
Thank you, Dr. Moore. Any other comments?
I'd also like to congratulate Heather on having our budget approved smoothly through the state. I do want to note that I saw online today that the Flemington-Raritan District did not have such a positive result from their budget submission.
We don't talk about our neighbors.
Okay, sure. But that's getting straightened out, apparently, so I just wanted to mention we didn't have anything to straighten out, so thank you, Heather.
Any other comments? Thank you, Mr. Nickel, for that report. And may we have a roll call vote?
Mrs. Bledfield?
Yes.
Dr. Charney?
Yes.
Mr. Davidson?
Yes.
Mr. Fowler?
Yes.
Mrs. Kellogg?
Yes.
Mr. Nickel?
Yes.
And Mr. Richard?
Yes.
All yes, motion carries.
Next, may we have the report from the Personnel Committee?
Personnel Committee met on Wednesday. We have 8 items to move and 4 more items of informational. The first on the list for movement is a retirement. Sharon Cooper has been with us 15 years. Next item is appointments, contractual appointments. We have 2, an ELL professional, step 11, and a chemistry teacher who is newly joining us, a young chemistry teacher who we're very happy to get. Then we have per diem. We have 2 substitutes, a teacher and a nurse, and of course we're very happy to have substitutes. Hourly appointments, an English language learner, teacher, and Spanish-English translator. Professional development, we have 10 actions, 10 people going to PD, and we have some leaves of absences, 5 of them, mostly FMLA, a 2-week sabbatical from Matthew Hall, and a special ed teacher who's just got a leave of absence paid. Then we go to rescind appointments. We rescind the following appointment and recommendation by the superintendent, Bernadette Mazarak, a cafe aide. And number 8, final one for approval, would be a withholding increment for a certain employee that has been discussed in executive session. Following this, we are going to items for approval, which would be the appointment of proctors, monitors, and test coordinators. There are 2 more for approval. Schedule C advisors. The agenda has Hillary Colton and Megan Petruccian for Noteworthy, which we just noted is a new club. We have a revision recommended by the superintendent for some dates for leave. And finally, we have
Coaches.
we have a coach who is getting a stipend for, no, he's it's
Volunteer.
an unpaid volleyball volunteer coach who's being appointed. Good for him. Okay, so I move items on personnel 1.1 to 1.8.
I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion and we have a second. Any discussion?
On number 8, we discussed the matter in the Personnel Committee, and I've briefed you all individually. If there's need for closed session conversation about that motion, we can certainly hold it until after coming out of executive session, but that's up to you all if you want to vote on that now or if you want to have some discussion in closed session about number 8.
Anyone have any feedback on that?
I'd like a review in closed session.
Okay, very good. Then, so we're not going to vote on number 8 at this point?
I'll revise our motion to move the items 1.1 to 1.7 then.
No, you also want 9.
No, 9 through 12 are for approval, not for moving. We didn't have to move them.
Okay. Gotcha. Got a motion, any second?
I'll second.
Thank you. Any other discussion? I just wanted to point out that as someone who's involved with teacher training, that finding a chemistry teacher is very, 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 very hard to do because there are very few available, and that we actually got one is amazing. All right, may we have a roll call vote, please?
Mrs. Blackfield?
Yes.
Dr. Charney?
Yes. and,
Mr. Davidson?
Congratulations to Ms. Cooper.
I'm sorry, Mr. Davidson?
Yes.
Mr. Fowler?
Yes.
Mrs. Kellogg?
Yes.
Mr. Nichol?
Yes.
And Mr. Richard?
Yes.
Oh, yes, motion carries.
Let's see, Ms. O'Donnell is not here this evening, so I don't know,
Yeah, I can
you
share.
give me- okay.
Yeah, just some quick thoughts. Work on the equity policy continues.
Thank you.
We have another writing session this week with students and our board members involved in that work, with coming soon some ability to share some draft language with you. It's coming along really nicely, and really proud. You've been in on the work with us as well. A fantastic group of staff and students working with us on that. And we'll make sure as we bring the final version to you for for review that we congratulate them. Maybe we'll have some more cake outside. So just a quick update that we're moving along on that project.
Very good, thank you.
Thanks.
Any additional business at this point? Seeing none, we now open up the residents' forum for any comments, and the same rules will apply, 5 minutes per presenter. No one can speak until everyone has gone. Please approach the lectern and state your name and the community where you reside. Thank you.
I'll do the timer for 4 minutes,
4 minutes,
and then
yeah.
folks will know that they have
Very
another
good, thank you.
minute left.
Good evening. My name is Lisa Santangelo from Reddington Township. In an email response regarding Policy 5756 and justification for not seeking parental consent, Dr. Moore shared the following. The age of consent for mental health services in New Jersey is 16 without parental consent. He is referring to the Keystone Law, which interestingly enough is not cited in the school policy, which states when a minor who is 16 years of age or older believes that he or she is in need of behavioral health care services for the treatment of mental illness or emotional disorders, the minor's consent to temporary, outpatient only, under the supervision of a licensed professional shall be valid. In Policy 5756, it defines gender identity as a person's internal, deeply held sense of gender, sexual orientation as a person's enduring attraction. Transition refers to affirming an authentic gender identity. The school also changes these students' school records, ID badges, and refers to them with the name and pronouns of their choice. Does this satisfy the definition of a temporary-only condition? Do the kids feel like this is a temporary condition? I don't think so. Also, 14 and 15-year-old students do not fall within this statute, and this policy does not currently reflect a carve-out for them. So the school policy is not in compliance with this law. Dr. Moore also shared that the reason for not seeking parental consent is that the Board of Ed is committed to providing a safe, supportive, and inclusive learning environment for all students. Policy 5756 cites FERPA, the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act, which protects 7 categories that should not be addressed with minors without parental consent, 2 of which are sexual behavior and attitudes and mental and psychological problems. This law states prior written consent of the parent or guardian is required if the student is not an emancipated minor. However, school policy states that the principal, superintendent, or certain staff can discuss gender identity without parental consent. This is not only highly inappropriate, but unlawful, and you are not licensed professionals equipped to have those types of conversations with minors. FERPA also states that the parents have the right to review a student's records and request corrections to records that are inaccurate or misleading. However, school policy states that only the school staff and student are allowed access to the new file created with their new gender, which parents have no knowledge of. The school policy is in violation of this privacy law and does not support a safe and supportive learning environment. What if a transgender student is bullied? School policy states that the school district must comply with the harassment, intimidation, and bullying law known as HIB. HIB states the school district shall adopt the policy through a process that includes representation of parents or guardians, as well as the Anti-Bullying Bill of Rights Act, which is a 55-page document that references parents 362 times. In that document, on page 16, the anti-bullying rights requires school districts to include the following groups when creating its policies. Parents. Here again, the school policy is not in compliance with these laws because the transgender policy must work in conjunction with HIB. Policy 5756 also cites the New Jersey law against discrimination, which requires schools to take action to prevent and remediate HIB that targets a student because of his or her actual or perceived sex, sexual orientation, gender identity, or expression. When schools do not take appropriate preventative and remedial action, they may be held responsible. The school is purposely not informing the parents that their child has changed their gender identity, and the school now removed that layer of required protection, which starts at the home. The law requires parents to be involved in prevention. The school is now accountable for not taking all preventative measures by not notifying the parents before an issue occurs and only after an incident happens. Also, page 3 of the school policy mentions there is no affirmative duty, which is legal obligation to notify parents. However, on page 5 of the same policy, under confidentiality and privacy, it states that the school must notify the parent when reporting a HIB incident of consent, because it would be in direct violation of these existing laws. These laws not only consistently recognize parental rights, but calls for their active involvement. Finally, there is a way to remedy these violations. This board needs to revise the policy to include parental consent for all ages up to 18 and notify the parents immediately whose kids have already expressed gender identity changes to the school. The school states that transgender kids are a high-risk group. Not informing parents is absolutely negligent, is in violation of these laws, and leaves the door wide open for potential lawsuits. I am hoping that you will adopt this simple remedy so that the school will become legally compliant and more consistent with all the other parental consent requests the school continuously seeks from the parents on many other lesser issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Santangelo.
I sign in first.
Please.
Good evening. I'm Janie Apgar, and I'm a resident and taxpayer in Reddington Township. And my issues are very similar to the last speaker. And I'm old, so my eyes are not perfect. And I thank you all for being here tonight. So I'm going to talk again about parental involvement and protected classes and the Harassment, Intimidation, and Bullying Act. According to the New Jersey Anti-Bullying Bill of Rights Act, each school district must annually establish, implement, document, and assess HIB prevention programs or approaches and other initiatives involving parents, law enforcement, other community members, students, school staff and administrators, and school volunteers. The programs or approaches and other initiatives must be designed to create school-wide conditions to prevent and address harassment, intimidation, and bullying, and that's NJSA 18A:37-17A. How can a parent prevent bullying of their transgender child if they do not know about it? The transgender student policy states that there is not a legal responsibility or an affirmative duty to notify parents. However, this seems to be a direct violation of the Anti-Bullying Bill of Rights Act. It eliminates parents from the HIB prevention program, which parents are already supposed to be required to be part of. Transgender students are in a protected category and are at risk for bullying. So, doesn't the policy endanger these children? There's also a recent New Jersey law, and that would be S1790, known as Mallory's Law, intended to make it easier for parents to report bullying that their children may be experiencing or perceived to be experiencing. That tightens up reporting requirements for school districts receiving the information, and it increases penalties for caregivers who neglect to address their child's bad behavior. Again, if we as parents are not aware of our children changing their gender identity and becoming one of these protected categories, which then heightens their risk for bullying, how can we work on prevention? What happens after an incident occurs? And isn't the school opening itself to full responsibility and liability by not informing the parents in advance? Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you, Ms. Apgar.
Hello, I'm Alison Castellano from East Amwell Township. This is just a really simple question, and I guess you may not answer now, but just you mentioned the Noteworthy group earlier. My daughter's in the Noteworthy. I'm just curious what difference that now makes to the group, because they've been performing in concerts, and I'm just curious what the difference is as to where they stand right now.
Yeah. Dr. Moore will answer that after your presentation. Is that okay?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions? Any other? We have.
How's everyone doing tonight?
Doing well, thank you. How are you?
Good. Wayne Fish. Haven't been at the last couple. Unfortunately, some life stuff has
We've
come
missed you.
up. So I just have a couple of quick little things. Obviously, we don't get our answers tonight, but it's something I do think we need to address. And excuse my ignorance if I didn't see it posted somewhere. I want to know: we are currently doing contact tracing still? So in regards to that. Are we still doing social distancing in the classrooms then? That's my question. If we're not doing social distancing in the classroom, then why are we still contact tracing? Are we, you're not doing anything to minimize this from happening and keeping our kids in school and keeping our kids learning. So I just found out about a case just this past week. It has nothing to do with my kid. People actually come to me and tell me things just because they see me, I guess, up here during board meetings, and I guess I speak up for them, so I'm a little bit of a voice. But I was aware of, I won't even say the subject and where it was done, but it happened in a classroom. The teacher's so paranoid still of COVID that she maintains that no one's allowed to sit in the front row, and then meanwhile, in her classroom, there's long tables lined up, and the kids are stacked against one another. So to me, that seems ridiculous to take that event. So, man, I hope I don't get the call for contact tracing, because if that goes on and that was my kid in that classroom, the blame's on you guys. My kid's, he's healthy. He's going to be coming back to school. So I just want to know, what is the school doing? If you're not doing social distancing in the classroom, then don't, you can't do the contact tracing with a healthy kid. Secondly, you're starting to see it in the news. You're seeing maybe, hey, there's going to be a resurgence in the fall. So what we continually heard this past year, we weren't prepared for this, we weren't prepared for that. That happened a lot. So I want to know, what have we learned from everything going on? Hey, we got our freedom back. We're in here, no masks. That's great. We all learned that masks may not be working. But what are we doing to move forward? We should start planning now. So some things that stand out to me and us here. One, we have we have somebody that works with the Board of Ed, a local person at the hospital. I think it's Dr. Riley. If this happens again, are we going to have her at the Board of Ed meetings where she's our professional, she's our guidance. She should be there to combat some of the questions that we have. I think that would be a good step moving forward. Two, where are we on getting going live in the classroom with video? You talk about how great technology is. We just heard a presentation on, from one of the teachers, there's no longer books. Everything's on the web and they're doing research, this and that. Well, it sounds like there's no more books. So it sounds like a lot of the instruction's being done in the classroom. Thus, the importance that we need to go live in our classes. It's not a difficult concept. Colleges are doing it. Other high schools are doing it. So we need to make that decision now, and it's a win-win across the board with these cameras in the classroom. Forget COVID. You have a student that's homesick with just the regular flu that does happen. Man, why can't that student still participate? Just log in and join the class and not miss out on anything. That's current times, people. And those are some of the things that we need to think about moving forward. So that's all I really have for right now. And I hope that we're all going to start planning for that. That's all.
Thank you, Mr. Fish.
Yeah.
Have a good evening. Any other comments? Seeing none, we will close the public input at this point and convene into executive. Oh, wait, you got
Board comments.
board comments. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, I just wanted to respond to a couple of things there. First, on
Yes, absolutely.
on Noteworthy, so Noteworthy's been in existence as a singing group for quite some time, and we discovered had not been sort of formally enshrined in our clubs list. So that's the only thing that is going on tonight, is just to close a technicality loop there. So it doesn't change their work in any way. We're just making it finally official. So we have Madrigals, now we have Noteworthy as well in the books. So that was just to make that formal. A couple of things in response to a couple of the thoughts that we heard tonight. There are interests. So the policy for transgender students, as it came about over the past several years with the guidance from the Department of Ed, and it does indeed talk about no affirmative duty for the district to notify parents. It doesn't forbid the district from having those discussions with parents. And I guess the first thing we want to see in a situation where a student is struggling in any way with identity. And when we talk about mental health, there's dysphoria and other things that come along with this, which can be significant struggles for kids, especially in a climate and a culture that too quickly and sometimes too often talks about them being unnatural or outside of what's normal. So we do see issues of dysphoria and depression with those students that lead us to the mental health side of things. But the most important conversations we have with parents are about those kinds of situations, and that requires openness in the family and openness between parents and their kids. The guidance is framed in such a way, I think, for those situations where kids don't feel comfortable or even sometimes safe to discuss some of those things outside of some of the trusted adults that they may have elsewhere in their life. Hopefully at home, hopefully at school, but also out in other places in the community. So we respect our kids and their needs in those situations. How that interacts with the HIB law, that's an interesting legal question, and I think that's something that if we ran into a situation like that, we don't have case law to go on there. We have many laws and many sets of guidance that potentially conflict with each other as they try to anticipate every potential scenario that might happen, but that's something that I imagine we would want to get some guidance on from our attorney in that sort of situation, because that is an interesting tension between those policies. As far as, thank you, Mr. Fish, for some of your thoughts. Yes, we're still contact tracing. We're still contact tracing because that's the protocol that we have from the Department of Health. And indeed, it's the Department of Health, not so much our district physician, as I've shared in email. It's the Department of Health, really, which governs those protocols. Our district physician wouldn't have much to say about it at all, actually. In addition, we talk about the cameras. The number I want you to think of two numbers. One of them is 6, and another is 5,000. 6 is the number of students who were absent from school today as a result of COVID, whether it was for being quarantined as a result of contact tracing or actually sick with COVID. One of the things that's really been helpful there is the Test to Stay program, which we're now able to implement for students, regardless of whether they were masked during exposure or not. And we've talked a bit about those changes over the months in that protocol, but that's been very helpful. We had a high of about 300 students in January. And that number 5,000 comes from January, which that number 5,000 was the number of online sessions that we were running in January from our classrooms. And when I shared that number with you prior, I shared that teachers would turn on a session and leave it on for several blocks, if not the entire day. So that number 5,000 isn't even a block-by-block number. The actual number of classes that were offered online for kids who were home through the height of the Omicron strain throughout the winter was actually much higher than 5,000. So, folks, the cameras were on. Cameras are on. Am I mandating it? We've had this conversation so many times. And my thought hasn't changed on that. But 5,000 Zoom sessions and Google Meet sessions in January. And again, that's not a 1-to-1 ratio to blocks. Cameras are on for those kids. And they will be on whenever the teacher working with that student determines that that's the best solution for that student's movement forward. So my answer hasn't changed on that. I just don't think for a moment that the question hasn't been answered. I think we're just struggling with the fact that the answer isn't appreciated. So there we are. Thank you. And I have items in closed session tonight. I have some personnel items, I have HIB items, and then we do have action to take
Yes,
on
I'll
that
do
one
that.
moment. Yeah, okay.
So thank you for that. I'm sorry for the amateur's effort on my part. This is the first time I'm doing
Nice
this.
job.
Forget stuff every once in a while. So at this point,
Before we go to closed session?
Yes,
Can I
go
close session? So, Dr. Moore, I just also would like to talk about, well, first of all, apologize to the parents and the board for not making the last board meeting. But I'm going to pivot on that because I think it is noteworthy, to steal from the group that was created tonight, and say that as I reflect over the last 2 years of pandemic, in 2020, we shut down for 2 weeks to flatten the curve. That obviously didn't work as effectively as they thought it might. But since then, there was a lot of comment of what's the new norm going to be? And I think as we fast forward 2 years, the one word that comes to my mind, at least professionally, is hybrid. The new normal is some version of hybrid. And I can appreciate that we're in a COVID slump, if you will, but there's always the potential, at the very least, that there's going to be a reflux. And beyond that, our future is hybrid as a society. And I can appreciate that there, again, to the numbers, is a high frequency of hours and camera sessions, but frequency doesn't always correlate to efficacy. And so if there is a perception that there's a gap, I feel it does behoove our institute as a learning educational platform to investigate that gap. And I think our ability to pivot, in my case, in the last board meeting, to have a person remote or not, is somewhat indicative of how we as an institute can pivot if we need to be in a hybrid scenario again. So I would implore you to perhaps investigate, and I'm happy to be in part of that, what we can do to close that perceived gap and put us on a trajectory where, as our society changes to a more hybrid society, we're ready to flex in that space because it's only going to set us up for success, in my opinion.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. No, I do appreciate that. And just for the benefit of folks, when a board member is absent from a meeting, and if we are going to offer an opportunity for a board member to participate virtually, it changes the way that we run that meeting based on the rules that we have to follow, and then it brings into questions whether or not we've advertised appropriately for the public to participate in that meeting. So we are kind of stuck in some of those situations. As far as hybrid in learning, I agree with you. I think there is a lot of future there. We were just having conversations today about how to meet the needs of a student who needs a different kind of approach. And that's an affirmative way to approach that question. What are the lessons that we've learned that allow us to meet the needs of our kids better, to give them more opportunities, to give them access to a broader scale of classes across the entire county? One of the things we find in our schools in the county, especially the smaller ones, and we're not one of those, is that they have trouble putting enough kids and enough teachers in a place to offer an opportunity to all kids. We can use that as a really a positive way to move forward together and offer more opportunities to kids. We had today, in fact, wasn't it, Mrs. Cangelosi, that we had a doctor from Spain visiting was that today? Tomorrow, that's tomorrow. Good, so I haven't missed it yet. So tomorrow we have a doctor from Spain visiting our world languages and other classes in here, right? To talk about cancer research that they're doing in Europe. It's really fascinating stuff. That's a very different situation from saying all cameras will be on at all times for all kids. I want to be, as we come out of this pandemic and learn the intricate lessons that we have to learn, what are the ways that we can leverage these technologies to provide more opportunity instead of in reaction to the kinds of situations that we've seen? Could we be in a situation with a pandemic in the future where we have to pivot back? Absolutely. Will we be able to do it better? I think so. Did we do it pretty damn good given that we did it on a dime? I think so. But how do we mine that for opportunities? And I'm eager to have that conversation with you at the table with your background, and I know folks in our IT department are as well, because there are good lessons to learn about how to be more affirmative in offering the opportunity from this stuff to all of our kids. So I agree that that's a need. A gap, I don't agree that there's a gap. I think the kids had access to all of the opportunities that they needed to move forward. I think the gap might be in understanding, well, what was needed there compared to what was expected. That's something we can continue to talk through. But I always do trust our teachers on those decisions to make sure that the kids are staying up to date after an absence, through an absence, based on the skills and weaknesses that they each individually have. So I appreciate that conversation, and we'll have more of it, certainly. Thank you.
Any other comments?
Yeah. Thank you.
Seeing none, I'd like to convene into executive session. So we have a meeting at 7:12, and there will be action taken afterwards. So can I see a voice vote to go into executive session? Aye?
Aye.
So moved.
Oh, I need a motion first, sorry.
So moved.
So
How about
moved.
that? All those in favor, say.
Aye.
Aye.
I'll get it next time.
Second.
Okay, so I need a motion to approve personnel item 8.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, I have a motion and I have a second. Any discussion? Okay, can we have a roll call vote, please?
Mrs. Blatfield?
Yes.
Dr. Charney?
Yes.
Mr. Davidson?
Yes.
Mr. Fowler?
Yes.
Mrs. Kellogg?
Yes.
Mr. Nichol?
Yes.
And Mr. Richard?
Yes.
All yes, motion carries.
Good. Yeah, I know. Can I have a motion to adjourn?
Second.
I have a motion and a second. May I have a voice call? Aye. Good night, everybody.